even though we know this rationally, we do have the hope that somehow for us, in our story, in our case, it will be different. In our case, we will fulfill the desire, and then somehow miraculously it will fill that hole in our heart, and it will just make the pain go away, and it will make everything be miraculous and wonderful.
The wish to be happy. The wish to be really happy for a very long time, to wish to be constantly at a state of joy. We all have it inside, and we're all deeply disappointed. We really want to be happy all the time, or at least the vast majority of the time, and the reality for almost everyone is that we're not. And that's heartbreaking. And by now we're almost ashamed, almost confused to have this wish to be really happy constantly, or at least almost constantly. And whenever we try to reach it, more and more suffering comes. It's apparently a dead end, but as we will see, if you shift your perspective and do a lot of intense inner work, this shift can bring actual lasting happiness. Now, when we search for happiness, mostly our go-to is desires. Desires bring the promise of happiness. Yeah, you get this that you desire, you get money, food, sex, appreciation, validation, promotion, anything that desires promise, you get that, and when you get that, you'll be happy. And as I hope just about anyone already understood, desires is a dead end. Desires can only bring lasting happiness to a person who has absolute control over the entire universe all the time. Yeah, because that's what it says, you know, you get stuff from the outside, therefore you're happy. You can't control the outer environment. The outer environment will change in ways you can't control, and therefore your happiness from desire will be short, will be fragmented, will be unexpected, uncontrolled. And the desires, as you know, is like a rigged game. It's like the casino. The more you play the desire, the more you get worn out, full of suffering, full of unhappiness. And then we say, okay, we want to be happy. Obviously, desires don't work. But then what would be the driving force? What are we going for? Well, actually there's something deeper inside. There are deep, what is called in Tantra, deep soul needs. Our deepest heart, let's say the bottom ground from which all desires and all emotions spring from, there in the bottom ground where we rarely visit, from there appear what is called in Tantra fundamental needs, fundamental wishes for peace, for love, for deep intimacy, for purpose. Those deep fundamental needs, if we meet them consciously, they will bring real, lasting fulfillment. And they will bring it in a way that is not on the expense of others, but the other way around. The more we are fulfilled at the soul level, at the deepest core of our being, the more we will fulfill others. So this will be the topic of our lecture, and we will start with a description of desires.
So, desires. Now, there is a lot to say about this term, and as we will see, it is defined in many different ways. It is even mentioned in the spiritual scriptures that desires are possibly the only way we can get enlightened. But we need to define a little bit what we mean when we use the term desires, when we use the term needs. What are we actually talking about? So when we are speaking about desires in this context, we speak basically about a bit of a mixture of instinctual needs and impulses and mental agitations, mental stories that are connected to those instinctual impulses. So basically we are speaking about all sorts of wishes that arise from conditioning. Wishes that arise from certain stories that we tell to ourselves, from certain experiences that we might have had before. Usually the origin of how these conditionings that then create desires is the seeking for pleasure and the avoidance of pain, which is sort of the instinctual go-to behavior. We will always try to understand what was pleasurable before, what did we like, what was comfortable, what was nice, what was pleasing. And then we will try to recreate that. And we will also see, okay, what was painful physically, emotionally, what was unpleasant, what was uncomfortable, what didn't really fit for us, and then we will aim to avoid that. This is sort of like, basically an instinctual programming that we have. Go for pleasure and avoid pain at all costs. Then comes the childhood. We are born, we go through various experiences throughout our life, and we have pleasurable experiences, good experiences, and difficult experiences. And in accordance with that, we have all sorts of collateral experiences that we then connect with that moment of pleasure. Okay, I felt good, I felt pleasure, and there was a chocolate cake present. So chocolate cake, good, go for chocolate cake. Oh, I felt pain, mommy didn't really take care of me. What should I do? Let's go for chocolate cake. Yeah. Or I had a painful situation with this person, that person. My needs weren't met. I wasn't visible enough for people. I didn't really feel affirmed, appreciated in my being, in myself, in who I am. And therefore, anything that was connected to this situation, for example, I just opened myself up and then I felt rejected. In the first 5-7 years of your life, if that just happens often enough, your whole neuronal system will be programmed to say, oh, opening up, not a good idea. It's not pleasurable. It brings pain. In psychology, this is known to be an avoidant attachment style. When we learn that when we open ourselves, that is a negative thing, we will in the future tend to avoid to share ourselves and to open ourselves in relationship with other people. So in this way, we get conditioned in time. In the first 5 to 7 years of our lives, our neuronal structure is very much involved into these conditioning processes. So those that were programmed then, they are sort of ingrained into your physical structure, and it will need a lot of effort to heal them and to get over them. But then as you go, more stuff comes on top. Now you start to develop a personality. You start to develop a story of yourself. You start to attach stories to the pleasurable and painful experiences that you have had. And the whole mechanism of chasing after pleasurable stuff and avoiding painful stuff becomes more and more complex, becomes more and more personalized somehow in time. So from that, you get the instinctual impulse that made you say, okay, if something is pleasurable, that's probably good for me, let me chase that. If something is painful, it's probably bad for me, let's avoid that. That's the instinctual part of it. But then on top of that, through conditioning, we come to a whole mental apparatus, a structure, a personality basically, that then is a blueprint of all the conditionings that we have experienced, and that then tells us whether or not we would want to chase after something or not. So therefore, desires are very different for many people. There are some ground desires that are the same. We all desire some instinctual parts like food, like sex, and so forth. But then if you would think, okay, it's only instinct, then all of us would desire to eat broccoli, because that's something that would be really good for our body. But then how come that we do desire to eat really crappy food that by empirical evidence is really, really bad for us, right? So this is due to these specific conditionings. Why do some people have a food addiction while other people have an alcohol addiction, while other people have a sex addiction, while other people have a screen addiction, and other people have a social addiction? How come? Well, because of the differences of stories that we tell inside of us, that we need a certain thing in order to feel pleased, in order to feel good. The thing with desire is that when we don't fulfill it, it's hurtful. It is very painful. In the moment we do fulfill it, we have, let's say, at least in the beginning, a moment of joy, a moment of pleasure. But much more than that, we have a break from the pain of the unfulfillment of the desire. So I say this again. When we fulfill a desire, we get a moment of break of the pain of not having that desire fulfilled. In the beginning, when we start to play with this desire, it might be like, well, okay, chocolate cake, yes, this is actually a joyful, pleasurable moment. But if you're talking to somebody who tends to always eat chocolate cake when they don't feel good about themselves, you will see that person will not even be able to describe you how exactly chocolate cake tastes. They are not aware that after the third bite, they have a little bit of a sour taste on their tongue from all the sugar. They will not be aware that actually they only like the first 5 bites, and after that it's just a mechanism of eating it. They will not be aware of that because the chocolate cake is just the promise of not feeling the pain of having an unfulfilled desire. Interestingly, as we will see later, the actual ground desire, the ground need even of what needs to be fulfilled by that cake might be something that has nothing to do with that cake. For example, well, I really feel bad about myself, and I've learned that when I feel bad about myself, one way to show myself that maybe the world isn't just an awful place of hell is to eat chocolate cake. That's just one way to show myself that. So that chocolate cake is actually there to comfort me. But real, true inner comfort will never be acquired by a piece of chocolate cake. Let's assume you've learned to eat chocolate cake because mommy didn't hug you enough. Well, that chocolate cake can never hug you like mommy would have hugged you. So the chocolate cake just becomes a break of the pain. It doesn't become an actual fulfillment. So sometimes fulfillment of desire might give a moment of pleasure, a moment of joy, but especially it gives a relief from not feeling fulfilled, a moment of relief from that, a moment of the promise of maybe I might feel fulfilled as I eat this chocolate cake. Therefore, you could imagine the entire story of desires is much more around their unfulfillment rather than their fulfillment. Therefore, the game with desires is sort of endless. It's just an endless agitation. Our teacher likes to describe it like, imagine you have a room filled with pendulums hanging from the pendula, is probably correct plural, I don't know, hanging from the ceiling. And you have a little monkey, the little desire monkey, who sits on the first pendulum. And then the idea is, but the pendulum over there holds the promise of fulfilling my desire. So the monkey starts jumping to that pendulum and it starts moving. And it's like, okay, no, I still don't feel it. Probably that one over there. Okay, let's jump. I still don't feel it. And within no time, the monkey has agitated all the pendulums in the room. Everything is moving around. Everything is more and more agitating, more and more aggravating. And still that hole in the heart is somehow not really fulfilled. That gap, the jump to the next pendulum, the jump to fulfilling the next desire was meant to fill up. That gap is still there. It's still unfulfilled. So the joy of fulfilling the desire is short, and the pain of longing to have the next moment of fulfilling the desire is usually long. And in time, you come to what we call addiction. So if you look at a heroin addict, the first 2, 3, 5 times of taking heroin is extremely pleasurable. They describe it like a deep dive into your soul. It feels as if you are going back into the womb and you just feel so fulfilled and so quiet and so wonderful. But then after some time of taking the drug, that feeling viscerally, so even hooked up to machines and measuring the addict consuming the drug, there is no more pleasure centers lighting up. There's no more pleasurable effect. There's no more joyous effect in taking the drug, but simply there is just not feeling the pain of not having the drug. And this is even something that anecdotally in interviews and so forth, people would then also share. And it has been measured and also found out in testimony. So this is sort of how desires work for all of us. We might not all of us be addicted to heroin, but it is the same principle. You chase a desire, you fulfill it for a moment. The first 5-10 times there might be some sort of relief, some sort of beauty to it. And then after that, it is just a painkiller. It is just, I'm feeling awful if I don't have it. Let me have it. Okay, now I feel a little less awful. And then just an hour later, I'm back into feeling awful. So this is somehow the addictive story of dealing with desires. Also in time, desires tend to have, when we play with them, when we try to fulfill them, they tend to have a numbing effect. So in time, you need to increase the dosage. In the beginning, you ate a piece of chocolate cake. A few years down the line, you're chucking down, I don't know how much ice cream, or whatever it might be. Or you need another addiction on top. Now you're having ice cream and movies, and then ice cream and movies and games and this and that. Yeah, so you need always more to feel okay. One example for people sort of getting a little bit stuck into this mechanism is pop stars or like celebrities that all of a sudden have a ton of money and can fulfill all the random desires that might pop into their head. And if then it's like, especially when it's like in the music industry where, you know, if you are in a certain genre, you could just go completely wild and that would be sort of acceptable. That's even expected. If you're a rock star, you're expected to take a ton of drugs and be a little bit of an idiot in many ways. And so you sort of have the full range of fulfilling all the desires. You are allowed by society, you have the money for it, so you just go for it. And if you look at people who are in that position and who don't have some sort of purpose, something that makes their life, their activity meaningful, then you will see that they tend to become something between completely lost children and something even sort of monstrous, where you just see them go through all the possible sexual things, druggy things, food things. They gain a ton of weight, they lose a ton of weight, they try the clothes like that, the hair like that, this, that, and it's a depiction of how it just doesn't work out. Whatever hole in your heart you're trying to feed with these desires, it will just not be fed. And then there are all these stories how then these pop stars will eventually realize that is so, and then they go to 12-step programs and they try to overcome their addictions, and then they cry their hearts out about their childhoods and so forth. So this is sort of a classic story. But in a funny way, even though we know this rationally, we do have the hope that somehow for us, in our story, in our case, it will be different. In our case, we will fulfill the desire, and then somehow miraculously it will fill that hole in our heart, and it will just make the pain go away, and it will make everything be miraculous and wonderful. As we will see, now there are diverse degrees of dealing with desires. But the first degree of, let's say, even a bit of a childish approach towards desires is this. There's pain that you try to avoid, there's pleasure that you're trying to go for, and then you have, by the story of your life, by the conditionings that you went through, various, let's say, ideas that will pop in your head in order to avoid pain and chase for pleasure, going then into these addictive cycles. So that would be a pure desire-based relationship with the world. Now we will see what other ways are there to deal with it. Hey guys, if you like this video, make sure to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content on spirituality, tantra, and more.
And if you want to sign up for our online classes or for our retreats, you can see our website on the description below.